Commander Sarah Mitchell sat alone at the corner table of Murphy's Bar, nursing a glass of water. The small coastal town of Oceanside, California, had been her home base for years, but tonight she felt like a stranger. She changed out of her uniform into civilian clothes, jeans and a plain blue sweater, wanting nothing more than to blend in and decompress after 3 grueling months overseas. At 42 years old, Sarah carried herself with quiet dignity. Her short brown hair was still damp from the shower, and the lines around her eyes told stories she could never share. 20 years in the Navy, 15 as a SEAL, the last 5 commanding some of the most dangerous operations in the world. But here, in this dimly lit bar on a Friday night, she was just another patron trying to find a moment of peace. The bell above the door chimed, and a group of young men stumbled in, their laughter cutting through the low murmur of conversation. Sarah recognized them immediately. Jackson, Martinez, O'Brien, and Chen, 4 members of her unit. They'd returned stateside 2 weeks before her, given early leave after the mission ended. She'd signed their discharge papers herself. They didn't notice her. Why would they? They'd never seen their commanding officer out of uniform, never heard her speak without the crisp authority of orders. To them, Commander Mitchell existed only in combat fatigues and tactical gear, a voice on the radio, a figure reviewing mission plans under fluorescent lights. Sarah watched as they settled at the bar, ordering rounds of beer and shots. Their voices grew louder with each drink. She considered leaving quietly, but something held her back. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the simple desire to sit still for just 1 more hour before returning to her empty apartment. "Did you see the commander's face when I asked about extending my tour?" Jackson's voice carried across the room. "Like she actually believed I wanted to stay in that hellhole." The others laughed. Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but she remained motionless. "Commanders don't get it," O'Brien added, his words beginning to slur. "They sit in their offices while we do the real work. Mitchell probably never even fired her weapon the whole deployment." Sarah's fingers pressed against the cool glass of water. If only they knew. If only they understood that every decision she made, every order she gave, came from experience they couldn't imagine. She'd earned her trident the hard way, proved herself in combat operations these young men had only read about in training manuals. But she said nothing. That was the burden of command, to be misunderstood, to accept the distance that rank created, to carry responsibility without needing credit or recognition. The bartender, an older man named Frank who'd known Sarah for years, caught her eye. He gave a small nod of recognition, a silent question asking if she wanted him to intervene. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. "Not yet." Martinez stood up, swaying slightly. "I need to hit the head, get me another round." As he walked past Sarah's table, he barely glanced at her. Just another woman sitting alone in a bar. Invisible. Unimportant. He couldn't have known that this woman had pulled him from a burning vehicle in Kandahar, that she'd made the call that saved his life when their convoy was ambushed, that she'd sat by his hospital bed for 6 hours, coordinating his medical evacuation while managing 3 other crisis situations. When Martinez returned, the group's conversation shifted to complaints about military leadership. Each story grew more exaggerated, each grievance more pronounced. Sarah listened to them describe a commander they didn't know, creating a caricature of incompetence and detachment that bore no resemblance to reality. Frank approached her table quietly. "Want me to tell them who you are, Commander?" Sarah smiled faintly. "Not yet, Frank. Let them talk. Sometimes you learn more by listening than by speaking." Outside, the Pacific Ocean crashed against the shore, the same water that had carried Sarah through Bud-S training 2 decades ago. Back then, she'd been one of the first women to attempt the program. The instructors had doubted her. Her fellow trainees had bet on her failure. But she'd endured every test, survived every challenge, and emerged stronger than anyone expected. 20 minutes passed. Sarah remained at her table, half hidden in the corner shadows, watching her former subordinates grow progressively more intoxicated. The bar had filled up, locals and off-duty personnel mixing together in the Friday night crowd. Country music played from the jukebox, and the smell of beer and fried food hung heavy in the air. Jackson stood up abruptly, grabbing his beer bottle. "Here's to freedom," he announced loudly. "Freedom from commanders who never understood what we went through." The others raised their glasses, cheering. Sarah felt a familiar weight settle in her chest, the loneliness of leadership, the isolation of being responsible for lives while remaining fundamentally separate from them. She'd made peace with it years ago, but moments like this still stung. Chen, the youngest of the group at 24, seemed slightly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Come on, guys. Commander Mitchell wasn't that bad. She got us home alive." "Barely," O'Brien scoffed. "Remember that call she made in Helmand? We could have taken out that target, but she pulled us back, made us look like cowards." Sarah's eyes darkened. That decision had been the hardest of her career. Intelligence had indicated civilians in the compound, children. She'd made the call to abort, despite pressure from higher command. 2 days later, her instinct was proven correct when satellite imagery confirmed a school had been operating in the adjacent building. Her decision had prevented a tragedy that would have haunted them forever. But O'Brien didn't know that. Couldn't know that. Classified information stayed classified, even when it meant accepting blame she didn't deserve. Jackson turned toward the bar, gesturing for another round. As he pivoted, his elbow knocked into his beer bottle, sending it spinning across the bar top. Frank, the bartender, reached for it, but the momentum carried it over the edge. The bottle sailed through the air in what felt like slow motion. It struck Sarah's table with a sharp crack, beer exploding across the wooden surface. The amber liquid splashed onto her sweater, soaking through to her skin. The bottle clattered to the floor, rolling under a nearby chair. The bar went quiet. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Everyone turned to look. Jackson squinted in Sarah's direction, his face flushed from alcohol. "Oh man, sorry about that, lady." His tone was casual, dismissive. He started to turn back to his friends. "Hey," Martinez called out, grinning. "You gonna let her sit there soaked? At least offer to buy her a drink to make up for it." The group laughed. Jackson turned back, his eyes focusing on Sarah for the first time. He saw a woman in her 40s, wet with beer, sitting alone, nothing more. He walked toward her table, his steps unsteady. Behind him, O'Brien pulled out his phone, already recording. These young men, who'd been trained to respect authority and honor service, were too drunk and too caught up in their own story to recognize what was right in front of them. "Here's what we'll do," Jackson said, his voice loud enough for the whole bar to hear. "We'll make it right. Bartender, bring this lady a shot of whiskey." He leaned on Sarah's table, his breath thick with alcohol. "You look like you could use some fun anyway. When's the last time you had a good time, huh?" Sarah looked up at him, her face calm, her green eyes steady. "I think you've had enough for both of us, son." The word son seemed to register somewhere in his intoxicated brain as condescending. His smile faded slightly. "Son, I'm not your son, lady. I'm a Navy SEAL. Show some respect." Frank arrived with a shot glass, his face troubled. He knew what was coming. He'd seen Sarah handle worse situations than this with grace and precision. But he also knew these young men were about to learn a lesson they'd never forget. "I said I don't want it," Sarah repeated quietly. "Come on," Martinez joined in, emboldened by the audience. "We're trying to apologize. Least you can do is drink with us, unless you're too good for us working folks." The irony was so thick Sarah almost smiled. Instead, she remained perfectly still, her training evident in every controlled breath, every measured movement. 20 years of discipline didn't disappear just because she wasn't wearing her uniform. O'Brien approached with his phone still recording. "Drink it," he chanted. "Drink it, drink it." The other patrons watched uncomfortably. Some knew who Sarah was. They'd seen her in uniform around town, knew her reputation. But they stayed silent, waiting to see how she'd handle the situation. Jackson picked up the shot glass and placed it directly in front of Sarah. "I insist," he said, his voice taking on an edge. "We spilled our drink on you. You drink ours. That's fair, right?" Sarah looked at the amber liquid in the glass. Then she looked up at Jackson, really looked at him. She saw the same determination that had gotten him through Hell Week during SEAL training, the same stubbornness that made him a good operator in the field. But she also saw the arrogance of youth, the dangerous assumption that strength meant never backing down, never showing restraint. Jackson's face reddened. Around the bar, people shifted uncomfortably. Frank gripped the edge of the counter, ready to intervene, but Sarah caught his eye again and gave the slightest shake of her head. She'd faced down enemy combatants in hostile territory. She could handle 4 drunk sailors who'd once been under her command. "You know what your problem is?" Jackson leaned closer, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a threatening tone. "You don't know how to have fun. You sit here all alone, looking down on everyone else. I'm trying to be nice, trying to make up for the accident, and you're acting like you're better than us." Sarah stood up slowly. At 5'7", she wasn't particularly tall, but something in the way she rose to her feet made Jackson take an involuntary step backward. It was the same presence she carried in the field, the absolute certainty of someone who'd faced death and survived, who'd made impossible decisions and lived with the consequences. "I think it's time for you and your friends to call it a night," she said quietly. Martinez laughed, a harsh sound fueled by liquid courage. "Oh, now she's telling us what to do. What are you, our mother?" "No," Sarah replied, her voice steady as stone. "But someone should have taught you better manners." O'Brien, still recording, moved closer. "This is great content. Guys, we've got ourselves a Karen situation here. Lady can't take a simple apology." Chen, who'd been hanging back, finally spoke up. "Come on, guys, let's just go. We've had enough." "Shut up, Chen," O'Brien snapped. "You're always trying to ruin the fun. We're celebrating. We survived a deployment that our commander barely understood. We earned the right to blow off steam." Sarah felt something shift inside her, not anger exactly, but a cold recognition that this situation had gone far enough. These men needed to learn a lesson, but not here, not like this. She'd spent her career trying to be better than the old guard, better than the commanders who ruled through fear and intimidation. She believed in leadership through example, through earning respect rather than demanding it. But sometimes, respect had to be taught the hard way. "Frank," she called to the bartender, "would you mind calling this in for me?" Frank nodded, understanding immediately. He picked up the phone behind the bar. "Calling what in?" Jackson asked, confused. "You gonna get us in trouble for what? We didn't do anything wrong. We spilled a drink. We tried to make it right. You're the one being difficult." Sarah pulled out her phone, unlocking it with a swift motion. She scrolled through her contacts, finding the number she needed. The bar was completely silent now except for the old jukebox still playing in the corner. "You know what I think?" O'Brien continued, his phone still recording. "I think you're just another civilian who doesn't understand what real service looks like. You see guys like us and you're intimidated. Well, guess what? We're Navy SEALs. We don't back down. We don't apologize for being strong." Sarah pressed dial on her phone. It rang twice before a crisp voice answered. "Captain Reynolds." "Tom," Sarah said, her voice taking on the tone of command that these 4 men had heard dozens of times but never connected to the woman standing before them. "This is Commander Mitchell. I'm at Murphy's Bar in Oceanside. I have 4 members of my former unit here who seem to have forgotten their training: Jackson, Martinez, O'Brien, and Chen." At the mention of their names, spoken with such precise authority, all 4 men froze. Chen's face went pale. Jackson's mouth fell open. Martinez actually dropped his beer bottle, which shattered on the wooden floor. "Commander," Jackson whispered the word barely audible. On the phone, Captain Reynolds' voice sharpened. Those four, they're supposed to be on restriction. They were ordered to stay on base after their incident report from last week. Are they drunk, Sarah? Very, Sarah confirmed. And they've been making quite a scene. I think they need a reminder about conduct unbecoming. O'Brien's hand shook so badly his phone clattered to the floor. The recording was still running, capturing the moment of horrified recognition spreading across their faces. "I'll have MPs there in 10 minutes, Captain Reynolds said. And Sarah, I'm sorry you had to deal with this." "It's fine, Tom. Just another teaching moment." She ended the call and looked at the four men who now stood before her like statues, their earlier bravado evaporated like morning fog. The silence stretched. Every patron in Murphy's bar watched, some with sympathy, others with barely concealed satisfaction. These young men had just learned the most important lesson the military could teach. Assumptions could get you killed, and disrespect always came with a price. Jackson found his voice first. "Commander Mitchell, we didn't know it was you." Sarah picked up a napkin and wiped the beer from her sweater. "Would it have mattered if I'd been someone else? Would it have been acceptable to treat any woman this way if she wasn't your commanding officer?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. "Do you know why I pulled you back from that operation in Helmand, O'Brien?" Sarah continued, her voice quiet but carrying through the room. "The one you just described as cowardice." O'Brien couldn't meet her eyes. "No, ma'am." "Because intelligence indicated 17 children in an adjacent building, children at a school. If you'd taken that shot, if you'd followed through with the original plan, you would have killed them all. I took the heat from command. I accepted the criticism. I let you think I was weak, because that's what leaders do. They make the hard calls and live with the consequences." The 10 minutes until the military police arrived felt like hours. Sarah sat back down at her table, and the four men stood before her like recruits at inspection. The rest of the bar's patrons had returned to their conversations, but the atmosphere remained charged with tension and second-hand embarrassment. Chen was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "Commander, I'm so sorry. I should have recognized you. I should have stopped them." Sarah looked at him and her expression softened slightly. "You tried, Chen. I heard you. But you let yourself be shouted down by your peers. A SEAL doesn't follow the crowd when the crowd is wrong. Remember that." "Yes, ma'am," Chen said, his eyes glistening. Martinez shifted his weight from foot to foot. The swagger had drained from his posture, replaced by the rigid stance of a sailor standing at attention. "Ma'am, in Kandahar, when our convoy was hit, that was you who pulled me out of the vehicle, wasn't it?" Sarah nodded once. "You were unconscious, you wouldn't remember." "They told me it was someone from command. They said she carried me 200 yards to the extraction point under fire." Martinez's voice cracked. "That was you." "It was my job," Sarah said simply. "Just like it was my job to sign your medical discharge papers, to ensure you got the treatment you needed, to write the recommendation that got you your Purple Heart." She paused. "And now it's my job to ensure you face the consequences of your actions tonight." Jackson, who'd been standing rigid and pale, finally broke. "Commander, please, we didn't mean. We were just blowing off steam. We'd never have." Sarah held up her hand, cutting him off. "You'd never have what, Jackson? Treated me with disrespect if you'd known who I was. That's exactly the problem. Respect shouldn't depend on rank or recognition. It should be given freely until someone proves they don't deserve it." Frank approached with a towel and a fresh glass of water, setting them on Sarah's table. "On the house, Commander, and for what it's worth, you handled that with more grace than I would have." "Thank you, Frank." Sarah accepted the towel, blotting at her sweater. The beer smell was strong, and she knew the garment was ruined. A small price to pay for the lesson these men were learning. O'Brien picked up his phone from where it had fallen. His hands trembled as he stopped the recording. "Commander, I recorded the whole thing, our entire conversation. The things we said about you before. I mean, I'll delete it. Right now, I'll." Don't, Sarah interrupted. Keep it. Watch it when you're sober. Let it remind you of this moment. Let it remind you that the people you dismiss, the ones you think don't matter, might be carrying burdens you can't imagine. Outside, the sound of vehicle engines grew louder. Through the bar's front window, Sarah could see military police vehicles pulling into the parking lot, their lights painting the night in shades of red and blue. I want you to understand something, Sarah continued, her voice carrying the weight of 2 decades of service. I don't take pleasure in this. You're good operators. You performed well in the field, but being a good operator isn't enough. The military needs good people. It needs sailors who understand that honor doesn't end when you take off your uniform. The door opened, and 2 MPs entered, their faces professional and neutral. They were young, probably around the same age as the 4 men who now stood at attention. Commander Mitchell, one of them said, nodding respectfully. We're here for Jackson, Martinez, O'Brien, and Chen. Sarah stood facing the MPs. These 4 men violated their restriction orders. They're intoxicated in a public establishment. They've engaged in conduct unbecoming. Captain Reynolds is expecting your report. Yes, ma'am, the MP responded. Then, addressing the 4 men, you're to come with us immediately. You have the right to remain silent, and anything you say can be used against you in disciplinary proceedings. As the MPs began to escort them out, Chen turned back one last time. Commander, the mission where we lost Rodriguez. You made the call to go back for his body even though command said it was too dangerous. You risked the entire unit for a recovery operation. I never understood why until now. Sarah's jaw tightened at the memory. Rodriguez had been 23 years old, fresh out of training, eager to prove himself. The IED had killed him instantly, and command had ordered them to withdraw. But Sarah had known what it meant to leave a man behind. She'd known what it would do to the unit's morale, to Rodriguez's family, to everyone who served with them. So she'd made the call. She'd led the recovery mission herself, brought Rodriguez home, and faced a formal reprimand for disobeying orders. It had been worth it. It had always been worth it. We don't leave our people behind, Sarah said quietly. Not in the field, not in life, not ever. That's what it means to be a SEAL. I hope you remember that, Chen. I will, ma'am, I promise. The 4 men were led out into the night. Through the window, Sarah watched them being placed in separate vehicles. Their military careers weren't over, not yet, but they would face consequences that would follow them for years to come. Frank approached her table again. Another water, Commander. Actually, Frank, I think I'll take that whiskey now. She managed a small smile. Just one, I've earned it. As Frank poured, several other patrons approached Sarah's table. They were older veterans, men and women who'd served in different eras, different wars. They shook her hand, thanked her for her service, shared their own stories of lessons learned the hard way. An older man with a Vietnam veteran cap paused beside her. My daughter wanted to be a SEAL, he said softly. She didn't make it through training, but seeing you here tonight, knowing women like you are out there commanding respect, it would have meant everything to her. It means everything to me. Sarah felt the familiar sting of tears she refused to let fall. Tell your daughter the door is still open. The SEALs need good people, regardless of gender. If she's still interested, if she's willing to do the work, there's always a place for determination and heart. 2 weeks later, Sarah sat in Captain Reynolds' office on the naval base. The walls were covered with commendations, photographs of ships and submarines, and a large American flag that had flown over the Capitol building. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. The disciplinary hearing concluded this morning, Captain Reynolds said, sliding a folder across his desk. I thought you'd want to know the outcome before it becomes official. Sarah opened the folder, scanning the documents. Jackson, Martinez, and O'Brien had each received 30 days of extra duty, reduction in rank, and mandatory alcohol counseling. They would remain in the Navy, but their records would carry this incident forward. Chen, who'd attempted to intervene, received a lesser punishment, 2 weeks of extra duty and a formal reprimand. Chen's requesting a meeting with you, Reynolds added. Says he has something important to discuss. Sarah nodded. She'd expected as much. Chen reminded her of herself at that age, uncertain, caught between loyalty to peers and adherence to principles. He was at a crossroads, and she knew from experience that the next choice he made would define the rest of his career. "I'll see him," she said. "What about the others?" Reynolds leaned back in his chair. Jackson submitted a formal apology, 3 pages long. He's requested assignment to a different unit, says he doesn't trust himself to serve under you without the weight of what happened affecting his performance. That's probably wise, Sarah acknowledged. And Martinez asked for permission to address you in person. I told him that was your decision to make. Sarah thought about Martinez in that burning vehicle, unconscious and bleeding. She thought about the choice she'd made to run into danger rather than wait for backup. She thought about his mother, whom she'd never met, who would have lost her son that day if Sarah had followed protocol instead of instinct. I'll see him too, she decided, and O'Brien. Reynolds's expression darkened. O'Brien is the complicated one. He's filed a complaint claiming the punishment is excessive, says he was simply exercising his right to free speech, that he didn't know you were present, and that he shouldn't be held responsible for private conversations in a civilian establishment. Sarah wasn't surprised. O'Brien had always been the most resistant to authority, the one who pushed boundaries and tested limits. In the field, that quality made him an excellent scout, always questioning, always looking for alternative approaches. But in garrison, it made him a headache. His complaint will be denied, Reynolds continued. But it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of military culture. I'm recommending he be transferred to a non-SEAL unit. His skills are valuable, but his attitude is toxic. They discussed the details for another 20 minutes before Sarah left the office. She walked across the base, passing young sailors in their working uniforms, officers hurrying to meetings, civilians employed in various support roles. This was her world, had been for 20 years, a world of structure and discipline, honor and sacrifice. But also a world that was changing. When Sarah had joined, women in combat roles were rare. Women in special operations were unheard of. She'd fought every step of the way, proved herself again and again, earned respect through blood, sweat, and unwavering determination. Now there were more women in the pipeline. Not many, but enough to show that the door she'd helped open was staying open. Each one would face their own battles, their own moments of being underestimated or dismissed. But they'd also have examples to follow, proof that it was possible. Chen was waiting for her outside the administrative building. He stood at attention when he saw her approach, his posture perfect, his face serious. "At ease, Chen," Sarah said. "You wanted to talk." "Yes, ma'am." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I've been thinking a lot about that night, about what you said, about not following the crowd when the crowd is wrong. And I want to be better than that. I want to be the kind of SEAL who stands up for what's right even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." He met her eyes. "I'd like to request assignment to your unit, ma'am, if you'll have me." Sarah studied him carefully. The request was bold, especially given the circumstances. Most sailors would want to distance themselves from the embarrassment of that night. But Chen was doing the opposite, leaning into the lesson, using it as motivation to improve. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you want to serve under a commander your friends spent the evening criticizing?" Chen didn't flinch. "Because everything they said was wrong. Because I saw how you handled a situation that would have made most officers lose their temper. Because you've done things in the field that I've only read about. And because," he paused, "because I want to learn from someone who lives the values they teach." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest, pride, hope, and something deeper. This was why she served, not for the medals or the rank, but for moments like this, for the chance to shape the next generation, to pass on the lessons she'd learned, to ensure that the military she loved continued to evolve and improve. "Report to my office Monday morning, 0700 hours," she said. "We'll discuss your training plan then, but understand this, Chen, I don't give special treatment. You'll work harder under my command than you've ever worked before. I'll expect excellence in everything you do, and I'll hold you to a higher standard because you've asked for it. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes, ma'am," Chen replied, a smile breaking across his face. "More than prepared." Later that afternoon, Sarah met with Martinez in a small conference room. He'd brought the Purple Heart she'd recommended him for, still in its presentation case. "Commander," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I didn't know how to thank you before. I didn't understand what you'd done. But now—" He opened the case, showing her the medal. "This represents more than my injury. It represents the fact that I'm alive to receive it. Because of you." "You earned that medal through your service and your sacrifice," Sarah replied. "I just made sure you survived to receive it." "No, ma'am. With respect, it's more than that." Martinez set the case on the table between them. "I've been thinking about what we said that night, the things we assumed about you, and I realized we were so focused on our own experience that we never considered yours. We never asked what it cost you to make the decisions you made. We never wondered about the weight you carried." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote something for your personnel file, a commendation. It probably won't matter much coming from someone of my rank, but I wanted you to know that I see you now. I understand what you did, not just for me, but for all of us." Sarah took the paper, unfolding it carefully. The words were simple but heartfelt, a detailed account of the Kandahar incident, the rescue, the decisions she'd made under fire. It concluded with a single sentence that made her throat tighten. "Commander Mitchell didn't just save my life. She taught me what it means to be a leader worth following." "Thank you, Martinez," she managed. "This means more than you know." They talked for a while longer about his recovery, his plans for the future, the lessons they'd both learned. When he left, Sarah sat alone in the conference room, holding the Purple Heart case and the handwritten commendation. 20 years of service. 20 years of proving herself, of fighting for respect, of carrying burdens that others never saw. There had been times when she'd wondered if it was worth it. The sacrifice, the loneliness, the constant battle against assumptions and prejudice. But in this moment, holding evidence that her service mattered, that her leadership had made a real difference in real lives, she knew the answer. It had been worth it. Every difficult decision, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, all of it had been worth it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Frank at Murphy's Bar. "Your usual table is waiting whenever you're ready. First water's on the house." Sarah smiled. That evening she returned to Murphy's Bar, not to hide in the corner but to sit openly at the bar where everyone could see her. Frank served her water in a clean glass, and they talked about simple things: the weather, the upcoming baseball season, the renovations he was planning for the bar. Other patrons approached throughout the evening. Some thanked her for her service. Others shared their own military stories. A young woman in Navy fatigues introduced herself shyly, mentioned she was hopping to try for the SEAL program, asked if Sarah had any advice. "Be ready to prove yourself every single day," Sarah told her. "Not because you're a woman, but because being a SEAL demands everything you have. The physical training is just the beginning. The real test is whether you can lead, whether you can make impossible decisions, whether you can carry the weight of responsibility for other people's lives." The young woman nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "I can do that. I will do that." "Then I look forward to serving with you someday," Sarah said.